how two couples ended up in one bed, and what came of it. Megan slowly ran her fingers over the delicate fabric of her dress, gazing at herself in the mirror. The evening promised to be special, yet she couldn't shake the strange feeling that had crept up on her since the morning. Something in the air felt different, even though nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Her husband, Alex, had just stepped out of the shower. He looked fresh and composed, but the expression on his face was tense. Megan knew he disliked surprises, and that's exactly what this dinner seemed to be. Their friends, Sarah and Michael, had invited them over after a long break in their communication. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Alex asked, adjusting his tie. "Of course," Megan replied, trying to mask her own uncertainty. "It's Sarah and Michael. We've always had a great time together." But even she couldn't understand why their once strong friendship had recently cooled off. Why had Sarah decided to suddenly organize this get-together, and why tonight? The drive to Sarah and Michael's house was familiar, yet it felt unusually long. Alex was silent, his hands firmly on the steering wheel, while Megan stared out the window, reflecting on the past. Their shared evenings had always been filled with laughter, warm conversations, and glasses of wine. But tonight, something told her this night would be different. When they arrived, the door to the house was already ajar. Sarah rushed to meet them, her smile radiant. Her dress accentuated her elegant figure, but her gaze was a little too sharp for a friendly gathering. "You're finally here," she exclaimed, hugging Megan a bit longer than usual. "I've been waiting for this night." "So have we," Alex replied reservedly, casting a quick glance at Michael, who stood a bit farther away. Inside the house, the atmosphere was warm and inviting. A lavish dinner was set on the table, candles softly illuminated the room, and the air was filled with the aroma of freshly cooked pasta. Sarah was hospitable, but Megan noticed her friend was behaving slightly differently, too lively, too insistent. "Take a seat," Sarah suggested, gesturing to the table. "We've got something special tonight." During dinner, the conversation flowed effortlessly. They reminisced about the good old days, laughed at Michael's jokes, and shared updates about their lives. But something felt off. Megan sensed that behind these smiles lay something deeper. Sarah kept stealing quick glances at Alex, while Michael seemed overly interested in Megan's stories. The wine added to the relaxed mood, but also heightened the tension. As dinner wound down, Sarah unexpectedly suggested moving to the living room. "I have a surprise I want to show you," she said, her smile enigmatic. Megan and Alex exchanged glances. Something about her words made Megan uneasy, but she chose not to show it. The living room was cozily lit with candles. On the coffee table sat a tray of cocktails, alongside a game that looked entirely new. "It's a trust game," Sarah said, sitting down next to Megan. "I promise you'll love it." "And what's the catch?" Alex asked, his voice slightly tense. "Just answer the questions honestly," Sarah explained. "But keep in mind, this game might change how you see each other." Megan felt a rush of adrenaline. She liked the intrigue, but also realized this night could open doors to something they weren't prepared for. When the first question was read aloud, Michael handed Megan a cocktail, looking her straight in the eyes. "Are you ready to reveal a secret you've been hiding your entire life?" Megan felt her heart race. The envelope on the table seemed almost symbolic, separating their past life from something new, uncharted, and possibly dangerous. Alex silently watched Michael, his face unreadable, but Megan knew emotions were boiling inside him. "What's in it?" Alex finally broke the silence, his voice strained. "It's a surprise," Sarah replied, leaning forward and resting her head on her hands. Her smile was mysterious. "But you'll have to decide whether you want to know what's inside." Megan glanced at Alex, trying to catch even a hint of his thoughts. His eyes were fixed on the envelope, but his hands were clenched into fists. "All right," she said before he could respond. Her voice sounded stronger than she felt. "We'll stay." Alex looked up at her but said nothing. His silence was consenting but wary. Michael opened the envelope and pulled out a small piece of paper. Sarah took it from his hands, smoothed it out with her fingers, and began to read aloud. "The rules of the game are simple. Each of us answers a question or completes a task. Refusal means you're out of the game. Whoever stays until the end will gain. more than they can imagine. She glanced around at everyone in the room, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Is this like Truth or Dare? Megan asked, trying to sound indifferent, but her voice trembled slightly. Something like that, but much more interesting, Sarah replied, leaning back on the couch. It's more about how far you're willing to go to uncover the truth. The first question was directed at Alex. Alex, is there something you're hiding from Megan? His face froze. Megan felt the air in the room grow heavy. Alex slowly set his wine glass down and replied, No, nothing she doesn't already know. Sarah smiled, but her gaze remained piercing. That's just the beginning, she said and passed the turn to Megan. Your question. Have you ever thought about someone else while you were with Alex? Megan felt her face flush. She hadn't expected such a direct question. Her eyes briefly met Michael's, who sat calmly, watching her reaction. Everyone has thoughts, she replied cautiously, trying not to reveal how uncomfortable she felt. Be honest, Megan, Sarah insisted, leaning in closer. It's a game, and games need honesty. Maybe, Megan admitted quietly, lowering her eyes. Her answer made Alex stiffen. He straightened up on the couch but said nothing. The next task was for Sarah. Michael, smiling, read it aloud. Sarah, you must kiss the person you find most attractive in this room. Megan felt her mouth go dry. She expected Sarah to kiss Michael, but instead, Sarah stood up, walked over to Alex, and leaned toward him. Her lips brushed his cheek, and though it lasted only a moment, a spark passed through the air, shifting the atmosphere in the room. Just a game, Sarah said, stepping back with a mysterious smile. The next question was for Megan again. Megan, are you willing to trust this group enough to take on any challenge without objection? It was a bold challenge. Her gaze slid to Alex, who was now looking at her with distrust. She took a sip of wine and, mustering all her courage, replied, Yes. Sarah's smile widened. Then I have a task for you, she said. Go to the kitchen with Michael and spend 10 minutes there. Alone. Michael slowly unfolded the envelope, as if this simple act could unveil the secret hanging in the air. Everyone in the room held their breath. He pulled out a folded sheet and placed it on the table in front of Sarah. Sarah, maybe you should read it, he said, his voice calm, but a glint of excitement shone in his eyes. Sarah picked up the sheet, unfolded it slowly, and began to read. Her voice was soft yet carried a tension that made everyone in the room hang on her every word. This game tests your trust, openness, and willingness to take risks. You'll learn more about yourself and your partners than ever before. But be careful. The answers you give may change everything. Sarah paused, her eyes scanning the faces of everyone present before settling on Megan. The game has two types of tasks, questions and challenges. Refusing to answer or complete a task means you're out. The game continues until there's one winner. Megan felt her heart pounding loudly in her chest. She glanced at Alex sitting beside her, his gaze cold and distant. It's just a game, Sarah reassured them with a smile. We're all adults, right? Alex nodded slightly, though his tension was evident. Megan turned her gaze to Michael. His face was calm, but his eyes carefully tracked her every reaction. Let's begin, Sarah said, without waiting for a response, turning the paper back toward herself. The first question is for Megan. Megan flinched, feeling all eyes shift onto her. What do you consider the biggest mistake in your marriage? Her face flushed. The question was unexpected and far too personal. She took a sip of wine, trying to gather her thoughts. Maybe that I sometimes let my emotions take over logic, she finally replied, her voice calm but slightly trembling. Interesting answer, Sarah commented, jotting something down on the back of the paper. The next question was for Alex. Is there something you haven't told Megan about your past? Alex looked tense. He glanced briefly at Megan, then back at Sarah. No, nothing she doesn't already know, he said, his voice dry. Sarah raised an eyebrow but chose not to comment. Instead, she turned the paper toward Michael. Michael, this one's for you, she said. Describe your biggest sexual desire. Michael smirked, as if he had been expecting something like this. I suppose it's finding someone who shares my deepest fantasies, he said, his gaze lingering on Megan for just a second, long enough to send an uncomfortable chill down her spine. You sure know how to keep things intriguing, Sarah quipped before continuing. The questions grew increasingly provocative. The room's atmosphere thickened, tension building with each revelation. The game began peeling back layers of hidden emotions and desires that had been concealed behind the facade of normalcy. One question shook Megan to her core. Megan, if you could change one thing about your marriage, what would it be? She hesitated for several seconds, then answered, avoiding Alex's gaze. Maybe more trust. Her response hung heavily in the air. Sarah smiled, but it was more a smirk than a smile. Well, this is the perfect opportunity to work on that, she said, passing the paper to Alex. Your turn, Alex. Alex read the challenge aloud. Kiss the person you most desire right now. Megan held her breath, her eyes fixed on her husband. Alex hesitated, but then leaned toward her, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. Always so cautious, Michael teased. Sarah jotted something else down and glanced around the group. And now, the most exciting part of the evening. Are you ready to do what we've prepared for you? The room fell into a tense silence. Everyone froze as the sudden sound of the doorbell shattered the atmosphere thick with unspoken emotions and tension. Megan flinched, instinctively clutching Alex's hand. Sarah, who had been exuding confidence and ease moments earlier, froze in place. Her eyes flickered with anxiety she struggled to hide. Is this the surprise? Michael asked, casting a suspicious glance at his wife. No, definitely not, Sarah replied, setting her wineglass down. Her voice was steady, but there was an unmistakable edge of tension. I'll get it, she added. Standing up, Sarah walked toward the door with visible hesitation, trying to maintain her composure. Megan watched her, a strange sense of foreboding swelling in her chest. The door opened, revealing a silhouette in the dim light. A man. He was tall, wearing a dark coat, with light stubble on his face. His confident smile carried an undercurrent of hidden intentions. Sorry to drop by unannounced, but I couldn't resist stopping in, he said, his gaze locked on Sarah. Max, Sarah finally said, her voice unfamiliar to everyone in the room. Michael immediately rose from his seat, his eyes filled with barely concealed anger. What are you doing here? He demanded, making no effort to hide his outrage. Megan and Alex exchanged glances. It was clear this man wasn't just a casual acquaintance. His presence shattered the fragile harmony of the evening, exposing something far deeper and darker beneath the surface. Calm down, my friend, Max said as he stepped into the living room. I won't stay long. I just wanted to return something I left last time. He handed Sarah a small package wrapped in black paper. Sarah took it, but her fingers visibly trembled. I think it's better if you leave, Michael said, his voice commanding. You haven't changed, Michael, Max replied with a faint smirk. But you forget, I don't play by your rules. Sarah? Megan asked softly, unable to contain her curiosity. Who is this? Sarah opened her mouth to answer, but Max cut her off. I think your charming group might find it interesting to know who I am. I'm Michael's former business partner. And perhaps a little more to Sarah. You're crossing a line, Michael snapped, stepping closer. Meanwhile, Alex was watching everyone closely, his hands subtly moving to Megan's shoulder as if to shield her. What kind of more? Alex asked, his voice calm yet edged with steel. Max smiled and turned to Alex. Let's just say, I helped Sarah discover her true self. Isn't that right, Sarah? Sarah looked as though she wanted to disappear. Her eyes darted between Max, Michael, Megan, and Alex. This isn't the time or place, Max, she whispered, her voice sounding defenseless. Oh, I think it's exactly the time and place, he countered, turning back to the group. You're all playing your little games, but you have no idea what's really going on here. Sarah carefully took the envelope from Michael's hands, her fingers trembling slightly. Everyone silently watched her every move. Megan felt the tension in the room grow, as though an invisible string was being wound tighter and tighter. Alex, as always, appeared composed, but Megan knew he wasn't at ease. Well, let's see what we have here, Sarah said, trying to inject a light-hearted tone into her voice, though it came off forced. She tore open the envelope and pulled out several photographs. Her face froze, and all the confidence drained from her instantly. For a moment, dead silence hung in the room. "What is it?" Megan asked, leaning forward. Her heart was pounding so loudly she could barely hear her own voice. Sarah silently placed the photos on the table. Michael was the first to see them, and his face immediately darkened like a stormy sky. "Is this some kind of joke?" he hissed, turning his gaze to Sarah. Megan reached for the photos and slowly picked one up. Her hands trembled as she looked at the image. The photo showed Sarah standing far too close to Alex. Their faces were tilted toward each other, as if they were about to kiss. The next photo showed Alex holding her hand. "What is this nonsense?" Alex asked quietly but firmly, snatching the photos from Megan. "This is just some sort of montage," Sarah replied, her voice filled with nervousness. "Sarah?" Michael stood abruptly, his eyes gleaming with fury. "Is this true? Did you lie to me?" "Michael, calm down," Sarah tried to soothe him. "It doesn't mean anything. It's just a joke." Alex examined the photos closely, and the longer he looked, the more his face changed. His usual cool demeanor began to crack. He turned to Sarah. "Where did you get these? Who did this?" I don't know," she whispered, lowering her eyes. Megan sat silently, trying to process what she had seen. What did this all mean? She glanced at Alex, her thoughts tangled. Could this be real? "Look, this is some kind of game," Alex tried to say, though his voice lacked the confidence he wanted. "Someone's trying to provoke us." "A game?" Michael laughed bitterly. "A game? You're holding my wife's hand in this photo, and you call it a game? I don't even remember this." Alex threw the photos onto the table. "Sarah, tell them." "It was accidental," Sarah muttered. Her voice trembled, and her eyes filled with tears. "Michael, it doesn't mean anything." "Really?" Michael asked, his voice icy. "And how do you explain this?" Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but another voice interrupted her. This time, it was Megan. "Alex, you really don't know what these photos are?" Megan asked, her voice wavering. "No, Megan, I don't," he replied, though his tone betrayed a trace of anxiety. "This is some kind of setup." Sarah turned to Michael, who now looked entirely unforgiving. "All right, I'll explain everything," she finally said. "This happened during one of those nights when you and Megan left early. Alex and I had a bit to drink, but nothing else happened, I swear." Michael looked as though he was about to explode. "Do you believe me?" Megan asked Alex quietly, staring directly into his eyes. "Yes, of course, I believe you," he said, but the uneasy feeling in Megan's chest refused to fade. The tension in the room felt almost tangible, pressing down on everyone. Alex abruptly stood, the motion so decisive that the wine glass on the table wobbled. He turned to Megan, his face hard and strained. "We're leaving," he said, not looking at Sarah or Michael. "What?" Megan asked, her eyes widening in surprise. "Alex, are you serious?" "Yes, I'm serious." His voice was sharp, leaving no room for doubt. "I don't know what's going on here, but I'm not staying and participating in this circus." Michael smirked sarcastically and turned to Sarah. "Well, it seems the evening is ending sooner than expected," he said. "No, wait," Sarah interjected suddenly. Standing up, her eyes were filled with tension, but there was also a glimmer of determination in them. "Sarah, this has gone far enough," Alex said, crossing the room. He grabbed his coat and headed for the door. "Wait." Sarah's voice made him pause. She looked at him and Megan with an expression that blended desperation and resolve. "If you leave now, you'll lose the chance to know the truth." Alex turned back, his gaze sharp. "What truth? That you're trying to manipulate everyone here? I'm not interested." "Don't be so hasty," Michael added, settling into his chair with the air of someone enjoying others' discomfort. "She's talking about something you wouldn't even suspect." "Sarah, what are you talking about?" Megan finally asked, her voice laced with anxiety. Sarah stepped forward, her gaze fixed directly on Alex. "This concerns you, Alex." "And you, Megan," she said, then turned to Michael. "And you too, for that matter." "Enough with the riddles," Alex said sharply, gesturing at her. "Speak plainly." Sarah grabbed her phone from the coffee table and swiped across the screen a few times. Then she held it up so everyone could see. "I got this a few days ago," she said, showing a photo on the screen. Megan leaned closer, her heart sinking. The photo showed Alex at a restaurant with another woman. They were sitting far too close, their hands touching. "What's this?" Megan asked sharply, her voice trembling. Alex froze. He took the phone from Sarah and stared at the screen for a long moment. This isn't what you think," he said, handing the phone back. "Then what is it, Alex?" Megan asked quietly but insistently. "I met with her for work," he replied. "It was purely professional." Sarah smirked, but it was more a sneer than a smile. "Really? Then explain the next one," she said, swiping to another photo. This time, the image showed Alex standing by the same woman's car. They were embracing, and it looked far from professional. Megan felt her throat tighten. "Alex," she barely whispered his name. "It's not what it looks like," he repeated, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "Now listen," she said, her gaze shifting between Alex and Megan. "If you leave now, you'll never find out what's really going on." "You've shown enough," Alex said, his voice cold. "This is just a cheap attempt to sow doubt." "It's not everything," Sarah replied firmly. "There's more. And I'll tell you. But only if you stay." Megan glanced at Alex, then at Michael, and back to Sarah. Her mind raced with questions. "Alex, maybe we should stay," she asked quietly. "This is a trap," he snapped, though his voice lacked its usual certainty. "Maybe," Sarah said with a sly smile. "But you definitely don't want to miss what happens next." When Michael and Megan returned to the living room after their task in the kitchen, the atmosphere had completely shifted. Alex sat in an armchair with his arms crossed, shooting them looks that could pierce through walls. Sarah looked like she was waiting for a bomb to explode but chose not to interfere. "So, how was it?" Alex asked, his voice icy. "How was what?" Megan tried to keep her composure, though her heart was pounding. "Your 10 minutes," he said, not looking directly at her, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Megan sighed and sat on the couch, holding her wine glass. "It was just a game, Alex." "Just a game?" His voice rose as he stood from the chair and took a step toward her. "You didn't even think twice. You just went with him like it was nothing. And what did you want me to do?" Megan snapped back, her voice tinged with anger now. "Refuse? Get kicked out of the game?" "Yes, if the game crosses the line." Alex shot back. "The line?" Sarah interjected, her voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of tension. "Alex, it's just a game. Or are you afraid it might reveal something you don't want to face?" "Sarah, stay out of this," Alex said sharply, not even glancing her way. "No, let her continue," Megan said, throwing Sarah a glance. "Maybe you see something I don't." Meanwhile, Michael sat silently on the couch, his face unreadable, though his eyes carefully followed Alex's every move. "Listen, Megan," Alex began, turning back to his wife, though his voice was softer now. "This isn't about you. It's about how it looks." "How it looks?" Megan leaned back. "And how does it look for you to sit here and judge me when you didn't refuse to play either?" "It's different," Alex replied, though his words sounded uncertain. "Oh, really?" Megan said bitterly. "Then why didn't you refuse when Sarah gave you her task?" "Because Alex struggled to find a response, but Sarah cut him off. "Because we're all here to reveal ourselves, Alex," she said, her voice almost silky. "Isn't that the whole point?" Megan turned sharply to Sarah. "And what exactly are you trying to reveal, Sarah? You've spent the entire evening pushing everyone into conflict." "Me?" Sarah raised her eyebrows, feigning surprise. "I'm simply offering an opportunity. How you react, that's your own emotions at play." "This game is becoming toxic," Alex said, turning back to Megan. "And you know it." "Toxic?" Megan stood abruptly from the couch. "So, I'm at fault for not wanting to look weak in front of them?" "No, you're at fault for letting yourself be manipulated." "And says the man who let Sarah touch him during her task?" Megan fired back, not even thinking about the consequences. The room exploded with tension. Sarah smiled with satisfaction, while Michael seemed to be waiting for someone to throw the first punch. Ah, now we're getting to the heart of it, Michael said, his voice mocking. You don't see it, do you? This game is just exposing what's already there between you. Shut up, Michael, Alex growled, glaring at him. Guys, enough. Megan shouted, her voice breaking. Are we here to play, or to destroy each other? You've shown enough, Alex said coldly, his voice laced with finality. This game is just a cheap way to sow doubts. It's not everything, Sarah countered firmly. There's more. And I'll tell you. But only if you stay. Megan glanced at Alex, then Michael, then back at Sarah. Her mind was flooded with questions. Alex, maybe we should stay, she asked quietly. This is a trap, Alex snapped, though the confidence in his voice had waned. Perhaps, Sarah said with a sly smile. But you definitely don't want to miss what comes next. When Michael and Megan returned to the living room after their task in the kitchen, the atmosphere had shifted completely. Alex sat rigidly in a chair, arms crossed, throwing them looks sharp enough to cut through steel. Sarah appeared as though she was waiting for an explosion but refrained from intervening. So, how was it? Alex asked, his voice icy and clipped. How was what? Megan replied, trying to keep her composure, though her heart raced. Your 10 minutes, he said, avoiding her gaze, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Megan sighed and sat on the couch, clutching her wine glass. It was just a game, Alex. Just a game. His voice rose as he stood abruptly, stepping toward her. You didn't even think about it. You just went with him like it was no big deal. And what did you want me to do? Megan shot back, her voice now tinged with anger. Refuse? Quit the game? Yes, if the game crosses a line. Alex retorted. A line? Sarah interjected, her tone calm but with an undercurrent of tension. Alex, it's just a game. Or are you afraid it might reveal something you don't want us to know? Stay out of it, Sarah, Alex snapped, not sparing her a glance. No, let her speak, Megan countered, shooting Sarah a look. Maybe she sees something I don't. Meanwhile, Michael sat silently on the couch, his face unreadable, though his eyes carefully followed Alex's every move. Listen, Megan, Alex began, turning back to her, his voice softening slightly. This isn't about you. It's about how this all looks. How it looks. Megan leaned back, her tone sharp. And how does it look for you to sit there judging me when you didn't refuse to play either? It's different, Alex replied, but his words faltered with uncertainty. Oh, really? Megan said bitterly. Then why didn't you say no when Sarah gave you her task? Because Alex struggled for an answer, but Sarah interrupted him. Because we're all here to expose ourselves, Alex, she said, her voice smooth as silk. Isn't that the whole point? Megan turned sharply toward Sarah. And what exactly are you trying to expose, Sarah? You've spent the entire evening pushing everyone into conflict. Me? Sarah feigned surprise, raising her eyebrows. I'm just offering an opportunity. How you react, that's entirely up to you. This game is becoming toxic, Alex said, turning back to Megan. And you know it. Toxic? Megan stood abruptly from the couch, glaring at him. So now it's my fault for not wanting to look weak in front of everyone? No, it's your fault for letting yourself be manipulated. And says the man who let Sarah touch him during her task? Megan fired back without hesitation. The room erupted with tension. Sarah smiled with satisfaction, while Michael seemed to be waiting for the first verbal blow to land. Now we're getting to the heart of it, Michael said mockingly. You don't see it, do you? This game is just exposing what's already between you. Shut up, Michael, Alex growled, shooting him a dark glare. Guys, enough. Megan's voice cracked as she shouted. Are we here to play, or to destroy each other? The kitchen was illuminated by a warm yellow light. Megan entered first, trying not to notice how Michael quietly locked the door behind them. She felt a little uneasy, though she kept reminding herself that this was all just part of the game. Well, she said, turning to Michael, what exactly are we supposed to do here? Just be honest, Michael replied, smiling. He calmly walked to the kitchen island and leaned against it, crossing his arms over his chest. Megan sighed, trying to maintain a light tone in the conversation. All right then, If you're so honest, you go first, she said. What do you want to ask? Michael looked at her, and his smile shifted. It became more serious, almost pensive. It's not even a question, he said finally. It's something I need to say. Then say it, Megan replied, trying to appear nonchalant, though her heart pounded in her chest. Michael took a step closer. Now they stood quite near, and Megan felt a wave of unease wash over her. Megan, he began, his voice quiet but steady. Do you know that I've always noticed you? Noticed? She repeated, trying to decipher his meaning. Yes, he continued. From the moment we first met, you've always been different. Different? She gave a nervous smile. Michael, that sounds strange. Maybe it is, he admitted. But it's the truth. I've always felt there was something unique about you. Your laugh, your gaze, it's captivated me from the start. Megan felt her mouth go dry. She took a step back, trying to put some distance between them, but Michael didn't move. Michael, I think you're misunderstanding things, she said, striving to stay calm. We're here because of the game. This doesn't mean anything. It's not the game, he countered, his voice now almost a whisper. It's how I've felt for a long time. Megan froze, unsure of how to respond. She had never considered Michael as someone who might see her as anything more than a friend. All this time, he'd seemed like just Sarah's partner, a friend who was always around. Michael, I'm married, she finally said, hoping to halt this dangerous turn of events. I know, he replied, his eyes darkening slightly, but that doesn't change how I feel. You can't say things like this, she said, her voice beginning to tremble. Why not? He took another step closer, his gaze intense and tinged with desperation. Because you're afraid you might feel the same way? I don't, she snapped, though even to her own ears, her words sounded unconvincing. Michael leaned in closer, and Megan felt her heart pounding even faster. Tell me I'm wrong, he whispered. Tell me there's never been anything between us, not even a thought. Megan stared at him, her thoughts a tangled mess. She wanted to respond, but the words caught in her throat. I can't, she finally said, but she didn't finish. You can't, Michael echoed, and a hint of triumph colored his voice. Suddenly, there was a knock on the kitchen door. Are you two in there? Sarah's voice was light, but it carried a persistent undertone. Megan quickly stepped back from Michael, as though suddenly realizing how close they had been. Yes, we're coming, she called out, striving to regain her composure. Michael smiled, but this time his smile held a trace of mystery. This isn't over, he said softly before opening the door. When Michael and Megan returned to the living room, the atmosphere felt markedly different. Sarah sat on the couch, her legs tucked beneath her, her face tense. Alex watched Megan intently but said nothing. Their eyes met, and an unspoken question hung in the air between them. What happened in there? Sarah, who was usually full of smiles and jokes, sat silently, her gaze fixed on Michael. She held a wine glass in her hand, her fingers gripping it so tightly it seemed as though she was restraining herself from smashing it. So, how was your little task? Sarah asked, striving for a casual tone, though her voice carried a hard edge. Of course, successfully, Michael replied, sitting down next to Sarah. His hand lightly brushed her shoulder, but Sarah pulled away. Megan felt a wave of discomfort. She knew there had always been some tension and conflict between Sarah and Michael, but this time it seemed much more serious. Successfully? Sarah repeated, raising an eyebrow. Perhaps too successfully, judging by how the two of you look right now. Michael smiled, but his smile was strained. Sarah, it's just a game. You're the one who said this should all be light and casual. Casual? Her voice rose sharply. So, you think I should just sit here and calmly watch you spend 10 minutes with her in the kitchen? Sarah? Megan tried to interject, but Sarah's voice drowned her out. No, Megan, stay out of this, Sarah snapped, turning to her. This is between me and my husband. Alex sighed and leaned back in his chair again, as if deciding he didn't want to be part of this conflict. But his gaze remained fixed on Megan. Sarah, you're overreacting, Michael said, his tone becoming more defensive. It doesn't mean anything. Nothing? Her eyes flashed. It seems like you use that word a lot when it comes to your relationships with other women. Michael froze. A tense silence filled the room. What are you trying to say? He asked, his voice steady, but his eyes burned with indignation. You know exactly what I'm trying to say, Sarah replied, her tone now laced with defiance. Megan felt her chest tighten. She didn't know what to do. In this situation, she felt like she was caught between two fires. Sarah, you're creating a problem where there isn't one, Michael said. Isn't one? Sarah shot up from her seat, her wine glass nearly tipping over. And what about the way you look at her? The way you act? Is that nothing too? Megan felt all the eyes in the room turn to her. She wanted to disappear, to dissolve into the air. Sarah, stop. Alex finally intervened, his voice calm but firm. This is a game, and you're the one who started it. Oh, really? Sarah turned to him. And don't you think your wife is crossing some boundaries too? Enough, Megan said sharply, her voice breaking. I'm not going to sit here and listen to you talk about me like I'm not in the room. Oh, now you're offended? Sarah asked sarcastically. And what exactly were you doing in the kitchen with my husband? Nothing you're imagining, Megan replied, her voice filled with anger. You're seeing something that isn't there. Maybe I am, Sarah said, narrowing her eyes. But who knows? The atmosphere in the room became stifling. Megan and Alex sat tensely on the couch, both silent. Sarah stood by the window, staring into the night, her figure almost motionless. Michael, on the other hand, looked relaxed and confident. His faint smile made Megan feel like something irreversible was about to happen. Well, friends, Michael began, snapping his fingers to draw attention. It seems like it's time to get to the point. Sarah turned back to the room, her expression incredibly serious. She walked over to Michael and stood beside him, crossing her arms over her chest. I think we've played enough, she said, her voice cold but with a hint of triumph. What are you talking about? Alex asked sharply. About how this game wasn't just a bit of fun, Sarah replied, her eyes fixed on Alex. Megan felt her heart start to race. What do you mean? She asked, unable to hide her anxiety. Michael stepped forward, holding a glass of wine. He raised it as if making a toast and said, This game, dear friends, was part of our little experiment. What kind of experiment? Alex asked abruptly. An experiment to see how strong your relationship really is, Sarah replied, her voice dripping with mockery. You're joking, Megan said, but her voice trembled. Not at all, Michael continued. We noticed long ago that there are cracks in your relationship, but the most interesting part was how easy it would be to turn those cracks into real chasms. You planned this? Megan felt a cold sweat wash over her. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. Every question, every task was designed to force you to reveal your true feelings, to make you doubt each other. Alex shot to his feet, his face livid. You're both sick, he shouted. Why would you do this? Sarah didn't flinch. Because it's fun, she replied. Fun? Megan stood up after Alex, her voice shaking with anger. You've ruined our evening, our relationship, and it's just entertainment for you? Michael placed his wine glass on the table and sighed. It's more than just entertainment, he said. It's an experiment. We wanted to see if you two should even be together. And, honestly, the results so far are disappointing. You're insane, Megan exclaimed. Sarah shrugged. Maybe, she said, but now it's up to you. We've given you a choice. You can leave things as they are and go home, or you can continue the game to uncover the truth. Megan and Alex exchanged a long, silent look. In her eyes, Alex saw fear and anxiety, but also a desperate determination not to back down. Alex sighed and finally sat back down on the couch. Fine, he said, his voice firm. We'll stay. Sarah smiled with satisfaction and sat down next to Michael. Her eyes gleamed like someone preparing to play their winning hand. Wonderful, she said. Then we can move on to the next round. Megan gripped Alex's hand tightly. She knew whatever lay ahead would be worse than they could imagine. This time, the tasks will be more personal, Michael began. We want to see how far you're willing to go for the truth. And how strong your relationship really is, Sarah added, her voice laced with mockery. Sarah picked up another envelope from the table, and tore it open. Inside was a list of tasks. She slowly read the first one aloud. Megan, name one thing you've always wanted to say to Alex, but were too afraid to. Megan froze. She felt everyone's eyes fixed on her, and her heart started pounding faster. This is ridiculous, she said, trying to keep her composure. It's honest, Sarah countered, her tone sharp. Megan paused for a moment, then looked at Alex. Sometimes I feel like you don't trust me as much as you should, she said quietly but resolutely. Alex raised his eyebrows in surprise, but said nothing. Oh, interesting, Sarah said with a nod. All right, Alex, your turn. She flipped the page and read the next task. Alex, if you could change one thing about Megan, what would it be? This is absurd, Alex said sharply. It's the game, remember? Michael pressed. Alex sighed and turned to Megan. Maybe I'd like for you to be less emotional in important situations, he said cautiously. Megan felt her heart tighten. Wow, she said quietly. Sarah smiled smugly and picked up the next task. Michael and Megan hug each other for 30 seconds. Megan spun around to face Sarah. Is this some kind of joke? No, it's part of the game, Sarah replied, her eyes sparkling. You have no right to ask for this, Alex said, his voice firm. It's just a hug, Alex, Michael said with a smirk. Unless, of course, you're afraid it might mean something more. That's enough. Megan snapped, her voice trembling. You're crossing the line. Are we? Sarah asked, her tone both playful and defiant. Or are you just afraid of what it might reveal? The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. Megan stood frozen, Alex's hand gripping hers like a lifeline. Michael leaned back in his chair, his smirk unwavering, while Sarah's gaze dared anyone to challenge her. Then you're out, Michael said, crossing his arms. Megan glanced at Alex. Her face was filled with doubt, but after a moment, she stepped forward. Michael stood and cautiously embraced her. His arms were warm, but Megan felt as though she was standing at the edge of a cliff. When the 30 seconds were up, she quickly stepped back, avoiding his gaze entirely. That was too much, Alex said, rising to his feet. We're just getting started, Sarah replied. The room descended into tense silence. Sarah, pleased with how the situation was unfolding, sat with a mysterious smile. Michael appeared relaxed, though his gaze lingered on Megan. Alex, as always, maintained a composed exterior, but his tightly clenched fists on his knees betrayed his true emotions. Well, Megan? Sarah's voice sliced through the quiet. Your turn. Megan felt every eye in the room fix on her. Her heart raced wildly, each beat echoing in her ears. She knew that every word she uttered now would be irreversible. This is ridiculous, she said, trying to buy time. It's a game, Sarah reminded her, raising an eyebrow. You either play or you're out. Alex turned to Megan. His eyes were filled with anxiety, but also carried an unspoken demand. What are you hiding? He asked, his voice steady but tense. Megan felt a cold sweat envelop her body. Gathering her thoughts, she stepped forward into the dangerous game. All right, she said quietly, avoiding Alex's gaze. There's something I've never told you. Alex raised an eyebrow, his expression growing sharper. It was a long time ago, she began, her voice trembling. Before we got married. What was it? Alex asked, his voice now carrying a faint note of anger. Megan hesitated, her thoughts spinning as Sarah and Michael seemed to savor the moment. I once had feelings for another man, she finally admitted, her words hanging in the air like an explosion. Who? Alex asked sharply. Megan lowered her gaze. Michael, she whispered. The room erupted with tension. Alex shot to his feet, his face frozen in anger. What? His voice was sharp and icy. It was before our marriage, Megan said quickly, raising her hands defensively. It wasn't serious, just a fleeting moment of weakness. Michael seemed to be enjoying the scene. Interesting, he said with a smile. I didn't realize I left such a mark on your heart. Shut up, Alex snapped, his voice trembling with rage. Alex, it's not what you think, Megan said hastily, her voice pleading. And what am I supposed to think? He turned to her, his eyes blazing. You've been hiding this from me, and now I'm supposed to trust you? I never did anything behind your back, she retorted, her voice rising. Then why didn't you tell me? Alex took a step back, his face tense. Because it didn't mean anything, she shouted. It was just a misplaced feeling that passed. Looks like our experiment is working, Sarah interjected, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Shut up, Sarah, Alex yelled, turning toward her. Alex, listen, Megan said, her tone now calmer. She stepped toward him, trying to meet his gaze. It was in the past. You are the only man I love. Alex turned away, grabbing a wine glass. He took a long sip before looking at Michael. And you? He asked. Did you know about this? Honestly, Michael replied with feigned thoughtfulness. I might have sensed something, but it doesn't matter. It was so long ago. It matters to me, Alex said. Alex took a deep breath, gripping the glass tightly in his hand. His face, tense and cold, betrayed nothing but restrained anger. He slammed the glass onto the table and turned toward Sarah and Michael. You wanted to test us? He said, his voice firm and cutting. Well, congratulations. You've succeeded. Michael smirked, leaning back in his chair, while Sarah remained motionless, her smile smug and triumphant. This game ends now, Alex continued, his voice resolute. We're done playing. If you wanted to see our marriage fall apart, Alex said, his voice quiet but firm, then I'll stay. But not because you control me or Megan. I'll stay to show just how far you're willing to go. Sarah raised an eyebrow, her smile reappearing. Interesting, she said. Let's see how much you're willing to risk. Megan looked at Alex, her eyes glimmering with anxiety. Alex, are you sure? She whispered. Yes, he replied, not even looking at her. They want to play with us? Fine. We'll win this game. Michael looked intrigued, but there was a hint of concern on his face. He turned to Sarah. Sarah, are you sure you want to continue? Absolutely, she said, her gaze fixed on Alex. Sarah pulled out another envelope and placed it on the table. The final task, she announced, her voice almost triumphant. We'll settle everything here and now. She opened the envelope and read the task aloud. Each of you must make the most honest confession that will change the life of the other couple. Megan froze. Her heart began pounding so loudly she could barely breathe. Alex remained silent, his eyes following every move Sarah and Michael made. We'll start, Sarah said. She looked at Michael, then at Alex. Do you know why we're doing this? Because you hate us? Alex asked sharply. Hate? Sarah laughed. No, it's not hatred. It's envy. What? Megan whispered softly. Your marriage, Sarah continued. We always thought it was perfect, but it turned out to be an illusion. So you decided to destroy it? Alex said angrily. Yes, Michael admitted with a shrug. We wanted to see if what you show is real. And? Megan asked, her voice trembling. Are you satisfied? Not quite yet, Sarah replied. Alex abruptly stood, turning to Megan. We won't give them what they want, he said. This is all a farce. They want us to destroy ourselves, but we're stronger than that. Alex, Megan began, but he interrupted her. Megan, he said, taking her hand. Let's leave. That will mean you've given up, Sarah said, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. No, Alex replied. It will mean we've chosen ourselves over your twisted games. He took Megan's hand firmly and led her to the door. Michael and Sarah remained silent, watching as the door closed behind their friends. When Alex and Megan stepped into the cold night air, she tightened her grip on his hand. Thank you, she said softly. We'll talk about this later, he said, his voice calm but resolute. Did Alex and Megan make the right choice by leaving the game?